Welcome back to Bisexual Killjoy, the place where we know bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. I'm Bailey, and this is
Jace.
In our last episode, we had an incredible conversation with Dr. Zori Paul about what it means to be both a person of color and bi+, in the third installment of our whole season dedicated to intersectionality. And in today's episode, Bisexual Killjoys at the intersection of bi+ Boulevard and Neurodiverse Avenue, we're finally diving into the details of an experience that is everywhere in our bi+ communities, being a bi+ person on the spectrum. This is perhaps the number one thing that people have asked us to talk about.
I think second to relationships, probably.
Oh, no, that's true. Yeah. So this is something that you have been clamoring for since season 1. And honestly, I think now is the first time that either of us has felt comfortable and competent to talk about it from an academic standpoint. So in this episode, we're going to cover our experiences as neurodiverse people, the research, research singular, it's 2 papers.
That's all we found.
I mean, we'll contextualize a little bit more, but also some of the stories that you all have been sharing with us for the last couple of weeks and also for the last year or so.
And on top of that, we'll be talking a little bit about our own experiences as neurodiverse people. But before we take that plunge, Bailey, what's in your Killjoy survival kit these days?
Being a bitch.
Did we talk about cutting down on the explicit reading?
No. Anyway, so being a bitch and being a bisexual killjoy is a little tongue-in-cheek, but I really mean that I no longer have a problem being perceived as a good person. Not a good person, a kind person. I don't need or want other people to be comfortable around me if they're going to be biphobic or if they're going to be bigots. And that extends outside of just the bi+ sphere, but in so many other arenas. I have no time for basically anything anymore. And I am much better at calling stuff out. And if you've got a problem with that, that's on you. So
leaving respectability politics at home sounds good. Sounds good to me.
It is, man, the world is on fucking what is today? It's March 23rd, 2025. A lot of weird, bad shit has happened in just about every sphere that I am involved in, even tangentially, if we're being real about it. And I am not here to make those people comfortable. I'm not here to pat you on the head and say, oh, well, you almost kind of sort of got the answer right. No, I'm going to be a bitch. And the only reason I say that is be a bitch is because you think I'm being a bitch. Really, I'm just telling you that something is wrong or you are wrong or you can be doing better.
Yeah, I'm not bringing something into the room. I'm simply calling out what's already there.
Yeah.
So in our Bisexual Killjoy survival kit these days, it's a permission slip to be a bitch when you need to.
Yeah, I like that idea of going into a room and just calling out something as it is. You know, go into a room like, these walls are blue. And someone saying, how could you say that?
How dare you?
I'm just calling attention to the fact that the walls are blue.
That is so rude.
Okay. The walls are still blue. So if you have been feeling some type of anger lately, please, again, your permission slip to let that rage, let the hate flow through you a little bit and be a bitch. So I'm excited to talk about neurodiversity today because I do think that a lot of people on the spectrum, ourselves included, have a deep-seated sense of justice. And it really bothers us when things are out of whack or people aren't being treated fairly. And in honor of that spirit, I would like to dedicate this episode to one of my dearest friends in the world, Carol Moses, who passed away last week. Carol was, in many ways, my bisexual godmother. She was a very good person, very, very, very much on the spectrum, and would come onto a Zoom call with me every single Wednesday for 4 years. And then she would point out the most obvious thing about me. Your bangs were cut. I don't like them.
Wow.
Thank you. I liked your bangs before, but they'll grow out and it will be better then. And honestly, that sort of just no holds bar was really refreshing to me because I knew how much she loved me because she noticed these things about me and knew when I looked best. And also she was not wrong. My bangs would look bad at a certain short length and they look better grown out.
I'm going to take that with me. It's okay. They will grow out and it will be better then. I feel like that can be applied to so much.
So in honor of her spirit, I am excited to talk about neurodiversity and the bi+ experience.
So a crossroads that often comes up for us as bi+ people is being bi+ and neurodivergent. At first glance, there's a lot that we share, I will say. We have no idea how to sit in chairs, for starters. And our neurodiverse perspective does appear to coexist with our bi+ worldview, as we discussed with Rosie Nelson in season 2, in one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, the episode with Rosie Nelson that kind of gave me a gender crisis for many weeks afterwards.
You're welcome.
No, I am. I was actually talking about this with Richie and a friend of ours a couple of weeks ago, where I was like, I'm really glad that I really thought about my gender, because that means the she, her labels, I chose them.
Yeah.
They're my labels. I am affirmed by them. And I'm glad that I spent time thinking about it. It's important to think.
It is.
So like I mentioned earlier, the intersection of bi+ness and neurodiversity is one that we have been asked repeatedly by all of y'all to talk about. And we do both have ADHD and cope with it in our own individual ways, which there are some similarities, but there are also some differences in how we approach taking care of our ADHD. But more than that, we do experience a relationship between the two. There's something abstract about being bi+ and neurodiverse, but it's still experiential, something that feels like this personal link that's manifested in so many different ways. And so thankfully, as researchers and theorists, we are always excited to find words to explain the ephemeral.
Not so thankfully. As scientists and researchers, it's difficult to navigate these kinds of highly medicalized intersections. Specific neurodiverse diagnoses, such as autism and ADHD, have been highly pathologized, and that typically doesn't mix very well with sexuality, which also has a history of being highly pathologized too, and in a lot of ways it still is. This leads to a large amount of discourse that focuses on lack, deficiency, trying to figure out how these kinds of quote-unquote deviations can be quote-unquote fixed.
Would you mind defining pathologized for us, please?
So to say that something has been pathologized is that it's viewed as abnormal, as unhealthy, as a kind of sickness.
Okay, so then absolutely neurodiversity is constantly being treated as this bad thing that you need to fix immediately, because otherwise you're not going to fit in.
Yeah, and it's surrounded by all of this scary discourse, right? Where you need to be afraid of because it's a scary thing to have.
Or we really put a lot of morality on illness, because if you get sick, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And you need to be cast out and shunned.
Not to say that we agree with any of this, but most of the research does focus on a heavy pathological approach, which is not great.
It isn't great. It really reinforces the idea that people are broken, and it can make it hard to get to the truth of the matter, or to rather give people better support structures that are designed to help them thrive instead of fixing them so that they can fit in a way that is acceptable. So that all being said, I don't think any of you should really be surprised that we had an incredibly difficult time finding an expert to speak on the topic, because, hello, we're the experts today. But also in just finding an expert in general that we thought wasn't going to give this pathologized approach. We know that there's nothing wrong with us. We are incredibly motivated, successful researchers, scholars, and people who also happen to have ADHD. There's nothing that needs to be fixed. We embrace our neurodiversity with excitement, and especially once we'll talk about this more, but once I finally figured out, oh, that's why I do things the way I do, I was like, oh, I have a superpower.
Yeah.
I just need to change the way I do my approach. And if I do that, if I can harness the ADHD energy, I'm going to accomplish so much.
We did eventually find someone who's done really great work at this intersection. But sadly, they're no longer in academia.
I don't know what that means. We don't think they're dead.
I mean, I can't blame any researcher, especially not one who's doing research at bi+ and neurodiversity, to say peace out of the ivory tower with how things are going. We still tried. We tried to contact them. We weren't able to. So for today's episode, we're going to be grounding our discussion in Alex Toft's article, These Made Up Things Mean Nothing to Me, exploring the intersection of autism and bisexuality in the lives of young people. We'll also be sharing a bit of our own lived experiences and the stories you have shared with us, so we're so thankful for that. And we want to talk about this in a way that is both informed and empowering. And also we're gonna call out the necessity for more research on this, but just a sprinkle on top.
Do you know if that Toft article title is a reference to a song?
It's a reference to a direct quote from a participant.
Well, it's also a song called Sick Shit by Pangea, maybe? Good song, good tune. Anyway, I actually haven't had medication today, so you're welcome.
Medication has worn off for this gal, so.
Richie, leave that in.
So this is going to be a full-blown ADHD moment episode on being neurodiverse. It feels perfect.
I mean, it feels like something. I will also say Alex Toft is not the only person that I have bumped up against in the bi+ research field that has retired from academia. Before Bi Health Awareness Month through the Bisexual Resource Center, I was doing a call out to previous partners who have worked with us on BHAM. And I think this guy may have worked in like youth services of some kind. And he reached back out and said, please do not contact me. I'm no longer working in bi+ specific healthcare. Oh, I'll remove you from our list post haste, sir.
Oof.
No, but actually, oof. These poor kids. Okay, so when you start looking at data, not just bi specific, but broader LGBTQ plus research, it suggests that there is more of a correlation between neurodiversity and people who are under the queer umbrella. But that kind of begs the question, are we on the spectrum because we're queer, or are we queer because we're on the spectrum? It really does kind of haunt me. It's the constant chicken and egg. So even in the limited data that we have seen, and let's not even talk about bi+ specific data, because again, it is these 2 papers by Alex Toft. There's, this Venn diagram that's basically a circle that suggests that a lot of folks on the queer umbrella are neurodiverse. And this is kind of brings up this double-edged sword question. Are queer people queer because they're neurodiverse, or are they neurodiverse because they're queer? And that can be a really damaging question, because has queerness caused this? Neurodiversity caused this? And that's the pathologized thing that you were talking about earlier, as though either of these things were a bad thing. And we're here to say that neither of these things are a bad thing. Like, it's good that you're both bi+, you're queer, and you're neurodiverse. These are all lovely things. But we are interested in how our community can navigate these intersections and lean into a place of strength as opposed to a place of there's something wrong with you, you fucking freak.
And this is exactly why we've stuck around Toft's work. What he does and his articles, they don't have this kind of pathologizing approach, which is admittedly like the bare minimum. And this podcast does pride itself on public scholarship. So this article gives an academic take on what it means to be both autistic and bi+, but it does so by centering the people who live at this intersection. This is a part of a growing field called neurodiversity studies, which distances itself from these old pathological approaches claiming that something needs to be fixed. All participants in this study, for this specific article, were both autistic and bi+, and the methodology used was very participant-focused. I will say that I was actually quite impressed when I was reading the methodology section. Participants had access to interview questions ahead of time to ease any kind of anxiety and allow for preparation, and they were later invited to share thoughts in a series of diary entries where they could write freely. And this allowed for an opportunity that if they thought about something later on, if they were prompted, they could write about it and not exist in this kind of anxiety loop that I'm sure you and I are very familiar with. Of, darn, I forgot to mention this thing. Well, that's okay. I can write it in the diary entry now. Toft positions the participants as experts in this intersection of their own experiences with sexual identity as autistic young people. The article itself is also really brilliant. It's written in accessible language, it's jargon-free, clearly structured, and could conceivably be widely circulated and understood, which is rare.
It is rare. I will also say that I'm sorry that you feel like, oh, I should have mentioned blah, blah, blah at the end of something, because I just black out when I talk. And if I missed it, I missed it. I don't know if that's a better approach.
I've learned to let it go over the years, but it used to haunt me really badly.
Okay, well, that's on growth. But I am curious for the article, how do folks navigate the intersection?
Okay, so I'm actually really excited. First, research about autism and research on bisexuality, bi+ness are both highly preoccupied with definitions. Mm-hmm. What exactly do we mean when we say autism? What exactly do we mean when we say bisexuality? So most research focused on either or will spend a boatload of time and word economy. Like, how many words do I have to write in an article? we'll spend a great amount of time or space simply defining what it is. And that's a commonality that these two share. Participants in this study also showed clear alignment between autism and bisexuality. A few things that stood out: bisexuality and autism are connected because they both challenge conceptions of gender, particularly reflected in relationships. Bisexuality and autism are often not really visible, either purposefully or otherwise. Such invisibility leads to invalidation and assertions that you are not bisexual or autistic enough.
I'm sorry. I have to be a certain level of autistic to get on this ride?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
I was on that side of TikTok for a time, back when I used TikTok, and it was honestly a little scary. The hate comments were very similar to bi-hate comments. Like, you're not autistic enough, you just widen the spectrum to include you. You're not bisexual enough, you have never dated a person of your same gender.
That's frustrating. Continue.
And the last note is that unlike disability is often desexualized. And what I mean by that is that often when we think about disabled folks, we don't think about how they engage with pleasure, with sex, and we don't take into account that they also have sex.
Yeah.
And they also have fun and intimacy in these moments. But autism, however, doesn't necessarily share that correlation. So unlike general disability and general disabled folks, autistic folks are often hypersexualized, mainly because of preconceptions about touch. So bisexuality aligns clearly here as an identity that is hypersexualized with discourses surrounding greed, and autism also hypersexualized because of assumptions surrounding touch.
I did not realize that there were stereotypes around people with autism and hypersexualization.
I mean, I don't have an official diagnosis or anything, but something that has come up for me quite a bit is that I'm a very big hugger, and I've always attributed that as a cultural thing growing up. My time in the US has taught me that that is not necessarily true. And a really big thing when I grew older and I hit puberty, I was like 17, it was definitely that giving people hugs was interpreted as a sexual advance.
Oh.
And I am definitely somebody who does not go touch-starved. Like, I am not shy about hugging people, holding people. It doesn't need to be romantic. It can be entirely platonic. And when I came to the US, I found out that that is definitely not socially acceptable. Y'all just walk around touch-starved all the time, which is kind of scary, I will say. So unlike disability in general, which is often desexualized, autism is often hypersexualized, mainly because of preconceptions about touch. Socially, we're very conservative when it comes to touch, and we're not necessarily open to alternative understandings of what it means to just be in close contact with each other. Bisexuality aligns clearly here as an identity that is also hypersexualized with discourses surrounding greed. So bisexuals are greedy, and that's why they're hypersexualized. And autistic folks don't necessarily share same understandings, like social understandings around touch, and they're hypersexualized because of that.
Well, let's dwell a second on the title of the article, which is verbatim from a participant being, "These made-up things mean nothing to me, because aren't gender and sexuality made-up things? Why do they even matter?" So, as we have discussed at length on this podcast, gender is a social construct, which is why it's often perceived as made up or fake, and why folks sometimes say that gender isn't real, or why people have the stickers on their water bottles that gender isn't real. But it's imperative to remember that just because it's human-made doesn't mean it's not real. It's because gender is a social construct that it becomes real. There are tangible social consequences for going against these pre-established rules and not abiding by these categories, which is something that we have seen a lot, like over and over again in our own lives, in the research, like everywhere we go. If you don't look a certain way, if you don't talk a certain way, if you don't look like you belong, people are going to treat you differently. And labels matter because they communicate where we stand in relation to the norms and how we interpret them for ourselves.
Precisely. For folks in this study, bisexuality as an identity label was used because it felt like an adequate fit, though not entirely perfect, but close enough. It was used as a part of a combination of identities, most often alongside queer, to provide a fuller picture of themselves. And bisexuality as a label was also a useful tool to show how they weren't reliant upon gender in relationships. To that extent, participants drew on their own worldview, as they felt that autism often means that social norms, identities, or boundaries between these things are difficult for autistic people to see. This was not seen as a negative situation, though. Not seeing these boundaries or understanding these roles wasn't necessarily a bad thing. They just simply shifted for a way that worked for them. As a result, sexual identities themselves, like the very concept of a sexual identity, they were just seen as more fluid, flexible, but also more difficult to describe, often leading participants to stack identities to create a fuller picture. To me, this sounded a lot as if speaking a different language. Sometimes when you understand the world differently, you talk past other people, often using the same words with entirely different meanings. Sometimes that happens when I'm talking to you or when I'm talking to folks around, because I use big words without knowing it. Oopsie. Other participants opted for the term queer to describe themselves, while others found bisexuality is still important to use and to remain.
So with all of this juicy data in mind and all of these really rich qualitative reports in, and we will link the article in the show notes for you to read for yourself, how do you, and I think I'm saying that in the royal sense, how do we navigate the intersection of being neurodiverse and bi+? It's a really difficult question because we know that there is a link. We know that there is an intersection between the queer bi+ experience and also the neurodiversity experience. And it's kind of hard to conceptualize, right?
It's definitely abstract.
Mm-hmm.
I am convinced that they inform each other as someone who just exists at the intersection, I suppose. But how, as a matter of fact, do they? And if I'm really honest, I feel like the whole I'm being an academic and rabbit holing on what it means to be bi+ is a really clear manifestation of my ADHD and being bi+ made incarnate.
Mm.
I started studying sociology because I was convinced that there were these invisible forces around me telling me to do things and that would be very mad if I didn't do the things the way they wanted them to. And when I took my first sociology class, my professor was like, "You're not crazy. That's true, actually." And that's why I stayed here. And that's why I've been doing the work that I've been doing for so long. It was in sociology that I was told, yeah, there are all of these made up things that are still very real, the same way a computer is man-made and it's still very real. I feel like my entire career is just me rabbit holing on, I don't understand people, let's make science out of it.
I feel like my discovery of my own neurodiversity was, like many other folks, because of COVID. My whole life, I had spent a lot of time and effort around creating schedules, right?
Yeah.
I would leave the house at a certain time. On the nose, it would be like 8:34 a.m., leave house. And if you leave at 8:34, you can go to Dunkin' Donuts on the way to work and get a nice coffee that's mostly sugar. And then, get to the office by 8:57. And then you work until this time and you do all of these things. And on this day, you go here. But then COVID happened and all of my structure, all of my schedules were absolutely gone. And all of a sudden, I was so depressed, I could barely get out of bed. And at first, I'm like, well, it's COVID. It's not a lot to be happy about, except the fact I was in a new relationship. And my partner and I had U-Hauled. It was really weird and I felt super out of control. And then I read more about ADHD, specifically in women, and how it presents much differently than it does in men. And I started tracking my symptoms and I started reading more. And then I finally went to the doctor and the doctor gave me a referral out to a psychologist. And the psychologist was this very put upon man who had way too many patients and still gave me my hour-long talk where we discussed things. And he's like, I don't know, it doesn't really sound like you have ADHD because you're so successful. That's what he told me. And I was like, well, here are my symptoms that I've been having for the last 8 months. I feel like they're in line with the ADHD experience. It's like, well, let me put you on Wellbutrin. I'm like, I'm not depressed. I promise you, I am not depressed. And he makes me take it. And within like a week and a half, I had suicidality like nobody's business. I was unwell. And I emailed him like, hey, definitely thinking that this isn't normal. Could we maybe try something else? And he put me on Ritalin. Ooh. I was so mad. I was so mad that it worked. I realized in that moment that I had not wasted, but I had struggled so much harder my whole life than I needed to, just because nobody looked at me while I was writing stories in math class because I was bored, was like, oh, she's just a little dreamy. Instead, I could have had social support and structures my whole life and medication, which is, this long-winded ADHD answer to say my experience as a bi+ person is kind of like being told, no, that's not real. Oh, no, that's in your head. You sound like a straight woman who just thinks women are attractive like that. But that's literally bisexuality.
That's literally.
Doesn't everyone think women are attractive? No, not everybody. I do think that experience is just not being believed or being told that it's not enough to be diagnosed or it's not enough to get medication or you should try something different. All of the things except be bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, all the other things except you're not ADHD, you have depression. Actually, I have depression because I'm ADHD and I'm undiagnosed and I'm just going around slamming my head into walls and working a lot harder than any human has any need to.
Yeah, like I remember the first time I took ADHD meds. I don't know if this is a common experience, but I think it is. I took my meds and I was like, you know what I could really go for right now? A nap. My brain slowed down enough that I was like, oh, a nap sounds nice right now.
I'm tired.
I'm actually a little tired. What I did learn a little later as I kept building the support systems and the outside structure to rely on as I went about my days and my weeks, what I found is that this is another task, put it on the list. I ended up using my sisters as like, this other task needs to get done. Better tell my sister so that she can get on it while I do this other thing. Then I started thinking about my mom and how often she used these everyday timers to time herself to do things, which I later learned. She'd be like, CJ, the most efficient way to do this is that when you put the laundry in there, then you do the dishes, and then by the time you're done doing the dishes, the laundry's already ready to be switched. And then, and it took me so long to learn that, like, that's an ADHD thing.
Yeah, and it's incredibly hereditary.
That's an ADHD thing. All of a sudden, everything made sense, and it made grad school so much less harder. Like, I had just started grad school. I was really frustrated. I was smart. I didn't need to study for tests, but when the tests are writing 10, 15-page-long papers, I need to focus, and I was struggling so hard. My psychiatrist was like, so how are you doing? And I'm like, well, coffee's the only thing that's helping me these days. And he's like, coffee, you say? Let's give you coffee plus. And he gave me Focalin, and I was like, my world has changed. Which is not unlike my experience with bisexuality, of actively hating myself because I'm lying to myself. Why do I still like guys when I know I like girls? If I know that I can fall in love with a woman, why am I still thinking that I might fall in love with a guy too? And it was definitely a moment of just choosing to stop hating myself for that then I could finally let go of all of the internalized narratives that it was just a bunch of people telling me things, this huge wall of awful.
You say that, and your experience in that last part really resonates with me, because when I asked our followers on Threads, hey, are you bi+? And also, are you ASD, ADHD, ADHD? We want to hear from you. People were coming out of the woodworks to tell us that, yes, I am like you. I'm bi+ and I'm on the spectrum. And our follow-up question was kind of, what kind of correlation do you see between those two experiences? And a lot of those answers had a lot to do with the expansiveness of neurodiversity, right? When you are not beholden to the social structures in the way that neurotypical folks are, you start unpacking what is gender, what is sexuality, what are sexual relationships, what is. And they apply that to their own sexuality, right? I am bi+ because it is an expansive label. I have the capacity to be attracted to so many genders, and my love is not attached to the opposite gender, whatever that means. And I was like, yeah, that is such a superpower, to have the ability to think about things in such abstract while also concrete ways.
Makes us really great philosophers, I'll say that.
Yeah, so let's say something about that queer women in history book I saw at the bookstore today. Sorry. Just going to start saying that all of your favorite philosophers were bisexual. or pansexual?
You know, honestly.
Probably.
Yeah, like probably.
Those Greeks and Romans, what do you think they were getting up to?
I'm sure that they were saying really sophisticated sounding things like, we do not subscribe
Oh my God.
to binary ideas. Which is true. We don't. I think that definitely for those of us who find ourselves at bi+ Boulevard and Neurodivergent Ave, Neurodiverse Ave, it is 100% about coming at the world with a kind of self-acceptance that actively rejects binary understandings of how, quote unquote, the world should be. And I think that it is when we reject these shoulds that we start to envision what a genuinely liberatory future looks like. Can you tell that I just came from a conference?
I can. So what do you want our listeners to know?
Well, I want our allies who are listening in, I want you to know that we are honestly just asking you to listen, empathize, and side with the neurodiverse bi+ people in your lives. Please remember that being neurodiverse and bi+ are not aspects of ourselves that need to be quote-unquote fixed. They are superpowers that allow us to experience the world through a unique lens. And for our bi+ listeners and our neurodiverse bi+ listeners, the only person who can determine if or how your neurodiversity and sexual identity inform each other is you. You are the expert, and you do not need to share that information unless you choose to. Our bi+ communities are here to welcome you as you are.
For all of our LGBT and B+ orgs, this is your reminder to work towards crafting spaces that are accessible and welcoming to neurodiverse folks who need your resources and events. And here's a little secret about organizers. I'm not here to spill the tea too much about the groups I'm in, but a lot of those spaces are chock full of folks who are also on the spectrum. And we try to do a good job to be welcoming and open and accessible, but we can always be doing a better job. It is hard work, but it is necessary work because the Venn diagram is basically a circle, especially in bi+ spaces. And when you allow your space to be more encompassing, it becomes richer. And that is only a good thing, especially right now. So, for only having 2 articles to talk about, we did okay.
I think so. I think we did pretty good.
As Jace mentioned, neurodiverse studies are a new kind of field, like it's an emerging field, and we'll probably be settling on broader LGBTQ+ studies for the time being, as we have in so many other areas, until another Alex Toft arises and decides that they're going to make bi+ neurodiversity their focus. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're listening right now and you're like, oh, there's this gap. There's this niche that I can fill. You should. But in terms of what is there to take away from this conversation, I would say it's pretty obvious that neurodiverse people, bi+ neurodiverse people, do have superpower. We are not pigeonholed into one way of thinking or feeling, and we have the ability to see the world through a spectrum, basically.
It's a brand new perspective that can only bring more good, more light, more insights and aha moments into your space. So, I don't know. I feel like our goal was to talk about this in an informed and empowered way. And 100% Toft's article was the only one we found in terms of academic articles that we could do that. But I also think that us as bi+ neurodiverse folks, I think we're doing a pretty decent job at lifting each other up. We know that we are good as we are. We don't need to be fixed. And that's exciting.
It is exciting. Well, thank you for tuning into Bisexual Killjoy, where we know that bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. To support us, share us with your friends, subscribe to our Substack, and rate our podcast preferably 5 stars. As always, we want to hear from you. Share your stories with us on Instagram or via email at bisexualkilljoy@gmail.com. We always love to answer your questions in our advice column. Give it to me bi+, so you can check out the Substack for more details on that. And until we meet again, keep being a bisexual killjoy.
Stay bisexual and stay strong.